Good morning. Good morning. If folks could take their seats, we will go ahead and get started. For folks who are here for the first time or for the first time in a long time, welcome to the Gennari Aronson Business Growth and Innovation Series. I'm Larry Gennari, and partner Gennari Aronson. Looking for my partner Neil. Here he is, Neil Aronson. And Sarah McGarrell from our office is here somewhere, probably getting folks to come in from the bagels and the coffee. We are delighted to be talking about branding. We have a phenomenal panel. The format is, as it always is a panel discussion. We'll do Q&A at the end, and we'll take your good questions. If we don't have time for all the questions, I think the panelists will be around for a little bit of time afterward. So, without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists, mostly in order, mostly in the order that I printed these up. Stacy DeBroff, who's sitting right in the middle. Stacy and I have known each other a very long time. She's the founder and CEO of Influence Central, formerly, or still, Mom Central. Stacy's passion is thinking about how to connect big brands to moms, families, and general communities. Right next to, actually we'll come back this way, right next to me, to my right, Fred Yen. Professor Yen is professor of law at Boston College Law School. Fred and I have taught a course on entrepreneurial finance for more than a dozen years. He's on sabbatical, but we can't let him do that, so he's our scholar in residence, coming to panels like this and meeting with clients individually to talk about many of the areas that he's nationally known for, including intellectual property, sports branding, and overall general business and entrepreneurial finance. Right next to him, John Gallant. John brings more than 30 years of editorial, media, and technology experience to his role as Senior VP and Chief Content Officer at IDG. As you folks know, IDG is the largest tech publisher in the world. John works here locally for IDG USA, where he really helps on content strategy. Next to Stacy's right, is a good friend of ours, and a long-time old panelist and commentator on issues. Christopher Mirabile is co-managing director of the Launchpad venture group. Chris is a full-time, prolific angel, and really now, I think, a prolific blogger. I certainly learn a lot each day when I take a look at what he has posted. Christopher is a recovering lawyer, so we can all applaud that as well.
Thank you.
And last, but certainly not least, Sean Ford. Sean is Chief Marketing Officer at LogMeIn. He's been concentrating in global marketing strategies for a very long time. Prior to LogMeIn, he was at Avid. So we have just a terrific panel, great perspectives and points of view. So we're gonna kick this off. To talk about, this is a very broad topic, and we're going to try to at least cover the surface and also give you a few important takeaways along the way. So, Stacy, I'm going to start with you. One of my favorite quotes from Jeff Bezos is, "Your brand is what other people say about you when you're not in the room." And I guess let's start broadly and then define what we want to talk about. What's the point of branding? When folks come in to talk to you and say, why should I hire anybody? Why should I be thinking about this? What's the point?
Well, I think that Jeff's quote is representative of a very big marketing paradigm shift, where it used to be when you were a company, and, a brand, and you wanted to define yourself, you could very carefully craft that story and decide exactly what words you wanted to use, how you wanted to position yourself. And now, especially with the rise of social media and this ubiquitous access of consumers and clients to opinion sharing, what happened is the brand story is no longer the one you tell, but it is the one told about you. And so it's not, and that's the idea of what's said when you're not in the room. The whole point of branding, and this was a quote I heard from somebody, it first took me back, but then I really understood it. We work with about 350 national brands and also some startups in our work, is that branding done well both attracts and repels. So it's designed to attract to you the right clients and customers. When you do it right, you bring them in, and when you do it wrong, I'm sorry, not wrong, but by the nature of your branding, it keeps people away. Ritz-Carlton, luxury hotel. We know it, it's upscale, discreet, it's told a powerful story, but it's also telling you who shouldn't stay there. So it's attracting a luxury clientele, but it's also saying, don't think this is a Motel 8. Don't come looking for bargains and discounts, because that's not who we are. And just as another example, Apple, we're cool, we're trendy, we're here to help you. Starbucks, it's storytelling, that branding that tells people why they're coming in, and the more powerful the brand story, the more powerful it draws and keeps clients and customers to you.
So, Stacy, this paradigm shift, John Gallant, you think a lot about content across the various publications online and on media. Tell us what's changed over the last few years. Are we experiencing paradigm shift?
Well, I think we're experiencing paradigm shift in both areas of the technology that we cover. We focus a lot on enterprise IT, which are the corporate consumers of technology, and we focus on consumers of technology, folks like you and I with our mobile phones and our health tech and our wearables and all things like that. And in both of those cases, those major segments of the market are going through huge change. You have within the enterprise tech space a number of really solid brand name companies, the EMCs, the Oracles, the Microsofts, the Ciscos, the IBMs of the world, and the world is changing around them. So they are trying to reposition their brand in an era of significant change around mobile, social, cloud, collaborative tools, just massive change in trying to establish their place. Meanwhile, you have a whole new set of companies who are trying to establish mind share and market share and brand share among those enterprise buyers and trying to cut through an enormous clutter in those markets and gain mind share there. On the consumer side, it's a little bit different. You've got a couple of very strong companies, the Apples of the world, the Nikes of the world, in the fitness tech space, the Samsungs, and you've got lots and lots of small companies trying to establish a position among consumers around what do they do, what problems do they solve. So no matter where you look at it, it's a huge branding challenge for lots of different companies in tech today.
So we have to think about this. Sean, when you came to LogMeIn, you came after Avid. Talk about how that was different and how you saw the game changed when you became CMO.
The game changed. I would say that, so Avid, and I was at Avid for a couple of years, and it went through its trials and tribulations, but that's sort of the 25-year-old established brand that really the products helped invent the industry of digital media. Really, if you look at Pro Tools, you look at Media Composer, most films, most songs are used there, and it was nonlinear editors. So the challenge there was, how do we take a company that was suffering and try to turn and sort of refresh the brand and sort of bring it back to relevance? And I would say it's a good segue to LogMeIn, not because of the fact that there was necessarily that legacy, but more really trying to integrate the brand itself with the strategy of the company. And a lot of times people make the mistake of separating those two things. And what we had to do was say, to start to think about LogMeIn's brand, what are the things that are transforming the space that LogMeIn's in? And there's really 3 different spaces. What is it, therefore, that's causing pain as a result of that transformation? And then how is LogMeIn uniquely positioned to win and sort of answer those pain points or those needs? And that gave us a fresh look at how we actually at LogMeIn, the same way we had to do at Avid, think about how to create a compelling, incredible, and relevant story about our brand for each of the businesses that LogMeIn's in.
And Christopher, you're hearing this, and you're hearing the challenges of Avid and LogMeIn. You're also seeing lots and lots of business plans that undoubtedly start with, here's how many users we have, here's how many Twitter followers we have. Can you speak to how it's changed your advice to that CEO or business manager about how they should think about branding?
It's a difficult issue. I'm of two minds on it in some ways, because the cycle has clearly sped up. And when you look at a company like Uber, I mean, they've been on the verge of losing control of the story of their brand for the last couple of years. The branding was essential to their growth, and they were very much a positive, set of associations. And then they expanded globally, and they've gotten into all kinds of issues. And for the last couple of years, the majority of the press has been sort of negative issues. So today's CEO really does need to understand her brand messaging and her strategy and the importance of it and the speed of the cycle and the sort of the need to compete. But on the other hand, And I think in particular, I should just add that in today's world with the fact that sort of anyone can contract manufacture a shoe, or you can use any number of tools to create a software. I mean, products are when LL Bean started making a quality boot, there were sort of fewer people who could deliver that kind of quality for that price, and we live in an increasingly commoditized world, so that makes brands more important, and the cycle's faster, and the noise and the clutter. On the other hand, I think there can be false comfort in brand-oriented activities for startups, and I think that just this sort of entrepreneurship sort of become a little bit of a lifestyle. There's sort of this notion that I have a brand, my company must be real, and I sort of it's a little bit like a company that's sort of way ahead of itself on its patent strategy, and they haven't really got product market fit yet, and they're spending a fortune on that. And so I think that the best brands are built in really authentic ways, and they're sort of the sum of a lot of consistency around vision and what you're doing for the customer, and they're built on actually really delighting and delivering value for the customer.
I want to talk more about that. Let's stay a little bit on the landscape, and to pick up on Christopher's point, Fred, you've written a lot about this. How has the basic landscape for that CEO or manager changed even in the last 5 years? It used to be that you would think about trademarks, service marks, and the like. How has the digital transformation of brand impacted those traditional tools, legal tools?
Well, I think the legal tools may not have changed. I think it's what happens to them in the marketplace. And once again, I think I'm going to echo what a number of these people say. The thing that has happened is the rise of the internet and the consumer on the internet in particular. What consumers can do with your trademarks may or may not be controllable by law. I mean, it may be formally controlled by law, but whether you can do anything about it before the damage is done is something that you may not have any control over at all, because once a bell is rung, it cannot be unrung. So, the right video on YouTube or the right gripe site or something like that, you may be able to slow somebody down with your lawyers, but by then it's too late.
Fair enough. Let's move a little bit to narrative and continuing this analysis of what the CEO and the manager have to think about. John, you've been a journalist for a long time. How important is business narrative today, and is it any different than it was even 5 years ago in the context of brand?
Yeah, I think there's tremendous opportunities around branding today that didn't exist a few years ago. What we see for our consumers, whether they're enterprise IT or pure consumers, is people want to know, what problem do you solve for me? And I think it starts with defining the me, who is that audience? And particularly for startups, I think that's a real challenge, because too often they try to bite off too big a piece of the apple originally. But you're trying to find out, who is the me, what's the problem that you solve for them, getting everyone in your company in sync. And I think that's a critical part of branding and marketing, is getting everyone in your company in sync behind that message, and then looking at the many ways that you can deliver on that message. And I think too often people think of the logo and the tagline as the branding behind that. It's really around the many different ways that you interact with customers, and today there's lots of good ones, lots of different ways. Stacy mentioned a number of them. We see that in social. I think sometimes the impact of social is overblown in these areas. Where I really see it is in customer service. That's where that marketing commitment comes alive. And that's that absolute commitment to solving that problem you said you were going to solve for someone. Beyond that, I think there's a real powerful narrative today through content. And as much as I'd like everyone to be spending lots of advertising dollars through IDG, there are really terrific ways to reach people through content today.
Let's talk about some of those tools.
Yeah, well, we've seen companies do that, whether it's to their executives blogging. I think that has some value. I think it's around creating content that's really targeted around the problems that your customers are trying to solve. So you look at a company like IBM has an absolutely terrific resource for developers, DeveloperWorks, huge content store for people who are in the development community. And that's a way to connect to them and show their understanding of the issues that developers feel. So I think you can use content, through your interactions with customers, what problems they're having, what questions they have, what issues they're trying to resolve. You can create content around those areas and be seen as an information source and a partner in solving those problems.
Sean, does this ring true?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. You know, when you think about, we think at LogMeIn about trying to drive greater awareness or greater brand recognition. Again, a lot of times people will go towards, let's just spend a lot of money on advertising or billboards or radio ads, and that's sort of that would be the equivalent of a sugar-based or a carb-based diet. What we try to do is shift over to more protein-based marketing, which would be, in order to establish your position in the market, you have to establish your credibility and your right to win. And oftentimes that has to do with going out and doing the hard work to create, and not necessarily proprietary content, but content that you own, that is validated by some third party that gives you the platform to be able to both credibly speak about things in a nuanced and interesting way, but also give you the credibility that people will believe and treat you as the partner, I think, that John was just talking about.
Stacy, Christopher, you want to add to that?
I do. I think that branding has really become about storytelling, and most everyone here has a business or is working for a company, a brand, and at the end of the day, one thing that's happened is that brands and companies are expected to have personas. So when you storytell, you're expected to storytell like you're talking to your perfect client or customer. And what happens is everything else in branding ladders up to that storytelling. And the way to get to that storytelling, and sometimes it's hard because you get muddled in your own story, so it's hard to separate out, like, what is it that I think, what is it that other people think, and the first thing you've got to do is ask, what is our vision? What makes us unique? Why would somebody come to us? Why would somebody come to us, and how are they going to describe us to their friends so that it's this word of mouth referral? And what is the specific market need that you've been designed to address? And then once you have clarity on that and that vision, then all the other parts of branding roll up to that. It's how you're going to talk to your customers in whether you're B2B or B2C in the forums you find them, whether you're talking to them through the content of blogging, whether it's your media approach about how you're talking to the press. It could be, what are you doing on Twitter, on Facebook, is Instagram? What are the platforms in which your message moves? What are the visual storytelling you have? And one of the biggest mistakes in building a business narrative is often we are tempted to be aspirational storytellers. We want to tell the story of who we want to be, but not necessarily who we are at the moment. And that creates false promises because we want our storytelling to map up with what our customers and clients find from us at the moment of interactions to keep that balance.
So storytelling is critical, but Christopher, that's different when you are a new company versus General Mills. So I want to talk a little bit about that difference. How is that different? And I guess I'll ask Christopher and Sean as well. Fred, I'd like you to jump in too. How is it different? How is the storytelling, how is the brand strategy different when you are new versus a company that's really trying to help people understand that you're still relevant, that you're still solving problems?
Well, the new company's just fighting for credibility and recognition. So they have a relatively modest set of branding goals, and they're starting 6 feet in a hole because in many cases they really don't necessarily have their vision, and they don't necessarily have a company culture. And it's hard to be really consistent in the application of something that's not fully developed yet. And so I think it's important for companies to get the foundation work done before going out there.
And what is that?
It's really understanding what your story is going to be, who you're going to try to serve, what you're going to try to stand for, what your values are, things like mission, and it's sort of even if it's not written down, it's having a branding playbook that you can apply across all the different kinds of interactions. The other thing that I was just going to mention, and picking up on things that Fred and Sean have said, is that the internet and all the tools associated with it have really sort of changed the game. And a lot of the larger brands are acknowledging that, but in a relatively superficial way. And the technology that is out there today is just mind-boggling in terms of what it can actually allow you to do if only the mature company had time to understand it and master it. So for example, there's technology out there that allows you to target your message to people who have Boston Red Sox logos visible in photos of them on Facebook. So there's technology scanning pictures on Facebook and finding the Nike swoosh, allowing you to micro-target. There are companies devoted to culturing really authentic conversations around brand fan communities and surfacing the people who are genuinely influential and empowering them to do more. So one contrast with startups versus more mature companies is that startups really they may be younger, they may be less experienced, they may be less steeped in traditional ways of doing things, they may be digital and internet native, and so they may be getting a little bit farther out in front and availing themselves of less expensive, more cutting edge tools that are helping them have an impact that's frankly outsized compared to really what they've got on offer.
Sean, has that been your experience? Because I know you're of course active at LogMeIn, but I know you advise early stage companies as well. How's that advice changed?
Yeah, so it's a good point. So it's an interesting thing. The brand can both be a forward-leaning asset or a bit of an anchor, depending on where you are, right? And so if it's an early stage company, I really think the strategy has to lead the brand. And what I mean by that is a precise, crisp articulation of what your value proposition is, where you want to go to market, who your customers are. It's the meat and potatoes of strategy. Mm-hmm. And from there, then the brand becomes the filter or the story that Stacy was talking about that resonates with that core constituency base. So it has to be very pragmatic because the goal is to survive and the goal is to attract and the goal is to be relevant. And you can work the brand story out once the more precise you are there. If you're an established company, if you look at LogMeIn, the simple thing is that LogMeIn started just by building remote access and connectivity and became an absolute pioneer in that space with great credibility. If you move forward to what we're doing now in the IoT space, we were talking about this earlier, Fred and I, everybody says IoT, and the cloud, it's a cool thing to say, and everybody feels like they're participating in it. But the question is who has the right to win? And we know that connectivity and being able to connect devices is something that is in our DNA and is a core asset that we're going to leverage as we build that IoT brand, and also gives us a right to win, and we know it's unbelievably hard. So a lot of times people talking about IoT are just thinking about what you do with all the data, what you do to manage your business, which is all important, but the connection of those businesses, making truly connected businesses, is incredibly complicated. And so therefore we as a brand leverage that heritage of being able to do that simply and securely. And so there's assets there, and then there's leading forward with those.
What a terrific story. Now, Fred, the Internet of Things, of course, is new. Many of the entrepreneurs that you counsel, both academically and professionally, are new. They face some of these same challenges. How should they be thinking about brand, particularly at the earlier stage, where there really is no particular brand to defend, build on, or think about?
Well, I think they can go about it one of two ways. They can look at it from the consumer side and say, well, what is the thing that the consumer needs? And say, our brand is about satisfying that. Or I think they can look within and say, what is it that we have a competitive advantage at doing? Because maybe we're really good at coding, or maybe we're really good at inventing things, or whatever it might be, and then build out from there. I think that's two different ways they can go about it. I also wanted to add one thought about how one thinks about branding that might be slightly different from what some of the other commentators have said, that I think is really quite provocative and I think valuable when one thinks about branding, particularly in the consumer space, which is that ultimately I think that what the brander wants is to become part of the consumer's identity. Right? That is what I am, is my relationship to the brand or that company. I'm a Gucci bag wearer.
Right. So as Christopher said, they've got
about what you are, and that's more than just solving a problem. There's lots of things that can carry, a cell phone and keys. It's a constitutive statement about identity, which I think when you can achieve that as a brander, you've got a really powerful tool.
So as Christopher gave us the example, folks, creating tools so they can search on Facebook for people with Red Sox logos and the like. You are creating a powerful tool in that way. How do you do that? Particularly if you're an earlier stage company, how do you make that part of your customer's identity? Or some of the tools that you might be able to use? And I throw that out to the whole panel. If that's a rational approach, how do you do that?
Well, I'm going to answer as an academic, all right? And then all the other people here are going to tell me that I'm crazy. But I think that from a psychological point of view, what I understand about what happens in a consumer's mind when looking at trademarks is this takes time. You can create a piece of technology and say, we'll have it up and running in 3 months. But I think the kind of branding we're talking about, the long kind of customer loyalty, takes years and years and years of penetration and association in the customer's mind. And that just begins then with really, really good positive associations between the customer's original contact with the company and the thing that comes to symbolize the company's brand. That can be the name, that can be a logo, it can be an environment, it can be almost anything that triggers in the consumer's imagination. When I have this need, I think of that supplier. And then you've got to come back to that year after year after year, day after day after day, and make it good.
Stacy, is that possible?
Well, I look at it differently. I think that, I hear what you're saying, Fred, and I think that that's definitely theoretically what's going on. But I think with brands, and also what I was talking about as a branding build applies to startups up to the major brands we work through. It's the same thing. I think that at the end of the day, what you're trying to do and what is proved most powerful, because when you think about a consumer funnel from awareness down and building into point of purchase, a tipping point that gets somebody to buy something, and that ultimately gets people to stay loyal to you. One of the things that's proving most effective, whether you're a startup, in a startup you even have to be more honed on why are you doing what you're doing? Are you doing it to make the same technology available less expensively? Are you doing it because there's an unmet market need? You still have that honed story. But at the end of the day, what really is rolling up into branding, because all of us ultimately, even when we identify with brands, we have a general mistrust of brands. And more than ever in our research, we've shown that consumers are very willing to untether brand loyalty based on their changing needs. So 87% of us are willing to switch. Used to be, we grew up, we were a Tide family, we're a Crest family. Now we're open. Like how many different toothpastes?
Why are we open to that?
Because of advocacy and what it is that, because we're actually looking for the best product, the best experience. But what it all boils down to is figuring out how to engage advocacy on your behalf. You can say, hey, we at Influence Sensor are great, we're working on these brands, we have sophisticated social and digital marketing and strategy, but at the end of the day, of course you expect me to say that. It's my company. So the real question is, how do you find those customers who are most passionate and loyal to what you do, and how do you ignite their conversations? And this is where social creates this huge amplification of this. How do you engage them to do the storytelling and the advocacy for you? Because that is the accelerant that then brings you in to closure with other people.
That sounds like a lot of money.
Not
Sounds
really.
like it's going to cost a lot of money. John talked about...
Actually, I was going to make the opposite point, which
Okay.
is why are people switching? Is because talk is cheap, right? And a lot of brands overpromise and underdeliver. Switching costs are pretty low. Products, especially in the consumer space, are relatively commoditized. And for me, it kind of gets back to the most powerful and authentic brands have to do with really delivering the goods for the customer over time. And that's the real, the other thing I think it's worth pointing out is that, most of these generalizations start to fail when we go too broad. The think different Apple, I want to aspire to this, I want to be associated with their products is a very personal kind of limbic brain consumer kind of a concept, as opposed to nobody got fired for buying IBM or I stayed at Holiday Inn Express, which is all about sort of business savvy and those kinds of things. So you have to be a little bit careful about the two spaces. But when it comes to startups and it comes to branding, talk is pretty cheap, and anybody with an internet connection can make brand noise, you just are, when you're in that space and you're just awash in relatively hollow sounding, undifferentiated messaging, the cute name, the cute logo, and some happy talk, but it's not there yet on delivering for the customer.
We're talking a lot about external efforts at branding. I want to pick up on John's thread internally. As you develop a branding strategy, what should you be thinking about? Trying to be interested in your thoughts, John, and your thoughts. And Stacy, when you meet with decision makers, when you meet with that CEO, do you say to her, how are you going to implement this and who else is involved? So I'd like the panel to talk about how internal messaging is as important or influences how you do the external branding.
It's a lot of names. I guess what I would say is that I struggle thinking about it as really necessarily anything other than just a different audience, but it has to be a part of whatever you do for a brand. The employees that you have are some of the greatest constituents that you have, and also even in social media, some of the greatest influencers in what the perception of your company is through places like Glassdoor and other places like that. So treating your employees as a constituent makes a lot of sense. And I think one of the things we touched on that a lot of people in this room are investors and VCs and very familiar with business, and just I was an English major, and so what do I know? But I would say that at the end of the day, you can really think of a brand and the performance of a brand the same way you think about a stock and the performance of a stock. Right? At the end of the day, you want a consistent set. You want it to consistently meet whatever expectations, meet or exceed the expectations that you have, and that will determine how the performance of the stock is, and that will determine the performance of your brand. And that's true for the internal audience as well, and external audience. When they interact with you, anywhere they interact with you, are you meeting or exceeding those expectations? Have you done and delivered the experience that people believe they're giving you the commensurate value to deliver? And when I look at it, the internal employee base and the communication, again, just needs to be consistent with the brand that you're expressing to the external base, and you need to treat that group as a core customer base and treat them in the same exact way.
You really need to give them the tools, obviously, and be very clear in the messaging. But the power of saying to an employee that they are an ambassador for the brand, everyone is an ambassador for the brand, and giving them the messaging, it's very, very important. Even if it's someone who has relatively minimal contact with a customer, they need to be charged with the idea that they are an ambassador for your brand, and that means they are fulfilling a particular mission and talking about a certain set of messages. That consistency is so important. If you don't have your house in order at home, how could the consumer fail to be confused?
Fair enough. John?
I'll give you a couple of great examples of this that we've seen in the enterprise space. One is Box, which is a very successful company, and the other is Pure Storage. And what they've done internally is magical on both sides. They have their employees 100% in lockstep on this is what we do, this is who we talk to, this is what we talk to them about. In the case of Pure Storage, flash storage, going directly after EMC, and they say, these are the people we talk to in the enterprise. These are the product sets from EMC that we're going after. The way we do it is we do a trial period with them. We promise them these results in the trial period, and they win 75% to 80% of those tests. And they're up to 1,000 employees now. They've had almost $500 million in venture capital invested. So if you talk to anyone in that company, they know exactly what their mission is. We're going to own flash storage because flash storage is going to take over the marketplace ultimately. Here's who we talk to. Box did the same thing. They said, this is a Microsoft product and capability that we're going after. They even had billboards going after this Microsoft product. Everyone in the company knew, who do I talk to? What do I tell them? How do we move this product? And they've had similar success. I think the challenge for both of them is that as their market gets bigger and more diluted, as their product set gets bigger, that gets a little more challenging. But Peter Thiel talked about this in the 0 to 1 book as one of the absolute critical factors to success that they look for in companies they invest in.
Sounds like a lot of discipline and training. Stacy?
Well, I think that what's really changed, having everyone, whether you're a 3-person startup or a very large Fortune 500 or 100 company, is social. Because there's been a blending of our public and private personas, and everybody who works in this company tends to be on social. They're on Facebook, they're on Twitter, they have Pinterest, they're out talking. And oftentimes they think they're talking privately. There was this scandalous moment in which one of a New York company's employees went to visit one of their clients in a small town in Tennessee and was tweeting from the plane, this place sucks. It's like small town America. And it was like trashing the whole brand. And it was When we saw that with even Domino's, when they had the terrible viral of these two guys, basically trashing a pizza, and it reflected on the brand. And so I think that, one, you've got to get everyone who works with you to understand the vision clearly. And it's amazing, even in my company, people talk about us differently. And so we often have to bring us back to a commonality of what is our sort of view and what is our persona. But also, your internal employees become your greatest advocates, but also potential liabilities. Because when they're out there thinking they're just talking to their friends, they're representing the brand. With larger brands, you start getting into silos that have up to now acted independently. Customer service is doing their thing. We have corporate doing one thing. We have sales doing another thing. And these silos actually all, when you get larger as a company, you start having more and more handles, more and more different brand differentiations that you're talking about. Sometimes you're talking B2C, sometimes you're talking to B2B. And if you don't really set social media guidelines and also remind people that they might need to separate their public, they might need to have a private Facebook setting and a public one, because everything that your internal employees is going to be adding into your storytelling. And that's why the conversation of what you were saying about building them in as a constituent, they are your advocates. They should be out there advocating for you, but they also reflect at every single moment, and everything they do has become more public. It's not under a veil of this is what we're doing within our company. And every time they're out there, whether talking to their friends or going on social, and social in particular, can really change how this internal constituency can either amplify and halo your brand, or really cause some damage that you end up scrambling to deal with.
And keep in mind the power of some of these new tools. I mean, LinkedIn allows any sentiment that's offensive to be linked to a brand instantly with a few keystrokes. I mean, virtually every knowledge worker in the developed world now has a LinkedIn profile. And anything that they say that's offensive is instantly attributable to that company with just a quick search on their name. And so you're right, it is a lot of work, but you have to do the work to get people to understand the implications of their behavior online.
Really critical point. John?
I wanted to add to what Stacy was talking about with social. I think we tend to think of social as kind of outbound, like what we're saying and what we're doing. I think the real value, as you mentioned, is how do you find these influencers who are the critical people whose minds you have to turn or encourage on your product. It's funny, I was at the KFC and Taco Bell in their war room for social, and it's amazing that there are these thousands of fanatical Taco Bell people.
And also that brands have set up social media war rooms.
Exactly. So not only are they, trying to keep track of instances like the guy licking the taco shells on YouTube, but more importantly, they know about 100, 150 people that are, and one of them is the model Chrissy Teigen, of all folks, you wouldn't think.
Wow.
Who are the Taco Bell advocates, and actually do lots of special things with these folks. They send them Taco Bell bling, if you can think of such a thing.
And she wears it.
But they've identified. And I think that's what a lot of companies haven't done, is looking at who are the 100 people that really move the needle, whether it's storage, wearable tech, IoT, whatever.
There are entire startups devoted to that simple problem of figuring out who those 150 people are and how to activate them. I mean, there's also sentiment analysis tools. I mean, it is an arms race out there in terms of what people are doing to control the conversation.
And yet, it really makes a difference. For example, I mean, the core of what we do at Influence Central is really about influencers. Whether they're millennials, boomers, what is the target demographic, fashionistas for clothes, whatever. But what's interesting is, and also within marketing, there's now been attribution modeling, which is very data-driven. But it was basically like, how can you track what you do? What is it that you do? And how does that then contribute to your bottom line? Because if you do that, you understand the amplification as we move from third-party marketing of advertising to much more social and digital. And the great thing about social and digital is it's a very inexpensive entry point for startups. But one of the things, for example, in a campaign we ran, we just used social to spread word about Oshkosh retail stores over the holidays. We engaged 40 influencers who are passionate about, they fit the demographic, they loved Oshkosh clothes.
How'd you find them?
Well, part of what we do is constantly, we build longitudinal databases of engaging influencers, and we go out and we do a sophisticated questionnaire to understand the level of their brand advocacy. Do they live near a retail store in this case? And we gave them a coupon, but the coupon was you had to spend a lot more money to get a discount than any other coupons that would be out there, as a way to sort of answer this attribution modeling. Can influencers drive sales?
Did it work?
$500,000 in sales in 3 weeks.
I guess so.
So that's the power of the changing marketplace with influence.
Well, I want to get to your questions, and this is such a broad topic. I'm going to throw this up to the panel. Fred, I'll start with you. If you have to summarize a key takeaway that you want folks to think about for the rest of the day, what would it be?
Well, I guess maybe I'll say two things. One is obviously the importance of trying to engage the people outside of your own walls. But the other thing that I would like to say, I think is an important takeaway of this is, no matter how good your branding is, expect competition. No matter what you do with your brand, no matter how strong it is, no matter how good you are at what you do and how good you are at problem solving, somebody else is going to come along who does equally as good a job and is going to want the same reputation that you have. And so you're never done branding in that sense.
John?
Yeah, for me, it's that crystal clarity on what it is you stand for or do for someone, and equally important, do those people care about that? In a lot of cases, we hear from entrepreneurs or other folks talking about problems that no one is looking to solve, or issues that are not all that important to folks. So I think it's those two things.
Stacy?
I think that one of the things that intrigues me, given the work that we are doing all the time in branding and strategy, is that oftentimes people get confused and think branding is static, like I've achieved my branding, this is my branding. And really, it's a very, very fluid thing now. Branding changes constantly. It could change daily. And one of the most important things in thinking about branding, and of all of us thinking of our own branding, not just for our companies, but our own personal branding, is understanding how people perceive us and constantly weaving that third-party storytelling about what people value about us, why they come to us, what is it that's drawn people to us, what is it that's drawn companies to succeed, and constantly interweaving that into our branding story, because that is, we are a sum of both what we think about ourselves and how others think about us. And as we innovate and change, the fluidity has to stay with us.
Terrific. Christopher?
Talk is cheap. Don't be lulled into a false sense of security just because you're going through a lot of branding motions. Make sure that your brand is built on a foundation of really delivering value for your customers.
Sean?
I would say that to the extent that your brand is integrated with your strategy is sort of directly correlated to whether or not you're going to be successful, and your brand is going to let you lead you forward. Meaning that if the brand is an absolute core part of how you think about how you're going to market and what you want to deliver, then the brand can take the role of actually leaning in and driving forward by managing that credibility gap between what you want your brand to be and what you are, and that's done with much more, I would guess, transparency and in a far more compelling way.
Terrific. We have time for a couple of questions. Giuseppe?
So, how do you best mitigate the risks and obstacles associated with altering a brand messaging or name, where it may have already become the social fabric of hundreds of thousands?
How do you change someone's impression of a brand
If you were to.
when it's already out there, if you will? Giuseppe, are you talking about sort of reputation management, or just generally changing a brand
Not so
that's
much the
established?
reputation, just as little as the brand, the messaging in terms of what value you're delivering for your users, or something as big as the name itself.
Great question.
I just went through that because we had started as Mom Central Consulting, and more companies were coming to us. So our core expertise were mom and women, but then we had from everyone across the board, and we're working with like 300 some brands every year, we're asking about millennials, and we were moving more and more into social digital. And so we had Millennial Central, we had Mom Central, we had Dad Central, we had Food Central, and all of a sudden we realized we needed an umbrella brand. And so we changed to Influence Central. And I think that one of the core, and it was interesting because I actually was just at a conference, and I said, hi, I'm Stacy DeBroff from Influence Central. And the woman said, I've never heard of you. And I said, well, we used to be Mom Central. She goes, oh my gosh, I know everything about you. And that was sort of the movement of the new branding. And I realized maybe I had to have my old branding sort of come along with this. But I think that one of the things when it comes to branding is usually you're either branding, in this case, because we had a broader footprint. We were actually doing something that was known, but we had to build that branding. And in this case, it was an adjacent innovation, right? The adjacent change to the branding was something that was consistent storytelling of where we had evolved. Sometimes you need to rebrand in crisis, and that changes sort of how you're answering brand negators and rebranding. But just like when we rebranded, we had to tell a new story. Why is it that our branding has changed? How does it reflect actually the core competencies and what brands and the companies that we work with are expecting from us, and how we have embedded more strategy and more social and more digital activations. And so I think that that's an example of a very carefully thought out before we rebranded. It really took us a year and a half to think through every contingency of how we were going to present and make that transitional branding step happen.
Sean, you did this at LogMeIn. Thoughts?
Well, I think that, I'm a big, I tend to sort of think with frameworks, and LogMeIn it's a fairly complicated story, but the simple version is, I would say that it to the extent that your brand has the assets and credibility that you want to carry forward into what you want to be is probably the extent to which that brand is worth trying to save, salvage, and sort of reposition. To the extent that it becomes a detractor, it sort of at least points to doing more aggressive rebranding, remessaging, and really rethinking the strategy that you have. And if you look at LogMeIn, it's interesting. One of the things we always struggle with is LogMeIn was what the name of is associated with the product that was the original remote access product. I need to log in. And that name is something that isn't necessarily connected directly to this IoT world of transforming the way devices and people interact. And so we're right in the midst of saying, how do we think about transitioning that name? How do we take the asset it has, which is an enormous customer base that sees it as an incredibly reliable and valuable product, and then appeal to an entirely new customer base in this world that we're moving into. And so, there's ways to do it, and we've talked about organizing around businesses, but it's definitely a challenge and an ongoing tension that we have to recognize.
That's a big job. Thank you for taking time to do the panel today.
Oh,
We gotta get back to work. Good job.
Can I sneak in a question for my two panelists on the end? IoT. Do consumers care about IoT?
I think they're increasingly aware of it. You just can't pick up any tech-oriented piece of media and not hear about it. And I think people intuitively understand that it has the potential to be enormously impactful. Day to day, they don't care in a visceral way because it's not doing anything for them yet. But it's going to be a very important part of the conversation for the next decade.
Can you market around it?
I think it's a bit nerdy. I think the phrase that catches fire in that space hasn't been coined yet. It's not going to be IoT.
You know what, but I would actually differ a little bit in that having gone year after year to Consumer Electronics Show, CES,
Yeah.
and having just walked Housewares Show, where we have a lot of clients, the Internet of Things, and I agree with you, it's not going to be the way people think about it, but where it used to be that for things to connect, they had to be able to generate their own signal. Now, just a very simple tab will connect it. You walk Housewares and you see connected stoves. The Nest is exactly the Internet of Things. I have a love-hate relationship right now with the Nest because my husband always turns it down. I'm like, who turned down the Nest? Like, why is the temperature
Does he
so
blame
low?
it on the Nest?
No, he's like, okay, I'll turn it back up. But at the end of the day, we see stoves that connect, so there's appliances that are connecting. We see it in technology. The Fitbit, we're walking around with not just from wearables, but also just the connectivity. So we're actually starting to expect at the consumer level that things will talk to other things. We haven't gotten to the fully connected homes, but we're moving there. And when you see the wave of innovation, I love this quote from William Gibson that says, "The future is already here, it's just unevenly distributed." The Internet of Things is here. It's just beginning, and now the new place is cars. Cars are going to become the next Internet of Things.
Can we get a show of hands? Who's heard of the Amazon Dash button? Came out yesterday.
Wow.
I rest my case.
That's true. I think we're going to have to leave it there. I hope our panelists can stick around. One very quick commercial. Take a look at galawpartners.com if you enjoyed this event. We have a few coming up on the 14th. We have an in-session discussion with our scholar-in-residence on the Internet of Things, of all things. June 3rd, we will also talk about the Internet of Things with a program entitled The Implications of Smart. And in May, we likely will have another in-session event on key legal topics for branding. Take a look at our website if you'd like to be added to the list or just want to learn more. Grab one of us here. We'd be happy to tell you. I want to thank our panelists. Thank you so much for spending the time. Sean, Christopher, Stacy, John, and Fred. See you next time.
Great meeting you guys.